Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com, where I am Executive Community Leader for Future of Payroll online community and also run a few advisory boards here, that one and a couple of others. My guest for this episode of the podcast is Jake Soliman, who's Vice President and Strategic Solution Advisor at Strata. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you, Brent. Pleasure to be here again.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. And that is true. Again, you were on the podcast. We actually ran out of time.
We did, right.
Which is amazing. Yeah, we could probably do a day-long podcast, although I don't know how many people would want to listen to that. But there were a couple topics we had planned. We didn't get to, and we really wanted to get to them. Yeah. So here we are. You're back, and we're about to cover those. So for the audience, anyone who happened to not listen to the first episode, and we'll have a link to that one in this one. What is it that kind of just galvanizes you day to day when it comes to the world of work? Because everybody has sort of a passion in this particular space, I find.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say for me, it really lines up nicely with my role at Strata, which is kind of a strategic solution advisor. So meaning helping customers solve their challenges. Specifically about that, when we think about the world of payroll and HR globally, that can mean different things to different customers in different industries. So really, it's waking up each day, being able to come in, help customers understand what problems they might not be aware they have, plus the ones that they're facing right away. And thinking of creative solutions that we can bring to help make that more seamless for themselves, but ultimately for the users they're serving, their employees.
Yeah. So Strata does a lot of things, and I know we got to a lot of it in the last episode, but one thing that we didn't get to is around advisory, which is a huge issue. And we're not going to boil the ocean today, although we might try. We can't help ourselves here, right?
Do my best. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. How does advisory factor into global payroll transformation, though? How does it factor into it?
Thank you, Brad. I'm glad we came back around to talk about this. And while it may not be, the hottest topic compared to AI that we talked about last time, it's almost just as exciting for me. And I think part of that answer comes into maybe a quick recap on what some of the challenges were with transformations before, right? So we had spoken about what we're seeing as an unfortunate trend where many customers who have gone through or are going through a larger transformation just aren't achieving the goals that either they set out to or they've already gone live and they're still struggling to meet those expectations that they set. And really, I think one of those big elements lines up to the construct of how they approached the transformation, everything from goals to the vision, as well as just what the ultimate drivers were that were starting the project in the first place to try to move this forward. And I think what many customers have come to understand is that there's only so much they're able to know, meaning they live within their industry, they live within their specific company, and in a good way, they've got deep expertise and understanding of that. But there's a lot of value in being able to have outside perspective, an outside point of view in, yes, but, meaning what's happening in your business is important, but how does that line up to what's happening in the bigger market, either from a technology standpoint, from a business case standpoint, from a trends and metrics where things are going. So one thing that's exciting for us is we've seen a big shift in much more openness, early phase projects to bring in, call it whatever you want to, could be advisory, could be partners, could be outside counsel, to be able to help set those expectations up front and then carry that through the implementation to bring a different level of, I'd say, rigor and oversight into the transformation. And I would dig into that a little bit to say there's kind of three main counterpoints to the challenge points we talked about that help drive that. The first one, much of what I've talked about already, is that end-to-end thinking, right? So a little bit from prior, we had talked about the cloud platform itself was intended to be the transformation, right? Once we got X system live, we'll be transformed and our world will be more efficient, better, business case success. And really what we've discovered and we've kind of known is it's an end-to-end model. We have to think about the employee experience impacts. We have to think about the operations model that sits around that, as well as the policies that go in. Because if you only change one element, it's hard to really leverage transformation across the others. So having that early step back with an outside perspective to say, let's think about all the inputs and outputs around the transformation. Let's define a holistic vision of what that's going to be. Kind of helps pull customers and their teams out of the minutia that's going to be the very complex, but technology implementation, and think of it from an overall holistic transformation. So thing one, again, would be that end-to-end perspective initially in the project versus at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Please.
Oh, I interrupt. I think you had a little bit more to add.
Yeah, I would say the second one was related to challenging status quo. So counterpoint to the lift and shift concept, where we're going to take what we have from a legacy system, move it into a cloud environment, and assume the efficiencies. And there are some. I don't want to downplay that. But someone, again, who's able to come in with expertise to say, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? If I can bring over my legacy configuration, if I can bring over my legacy earnings deductions codes, great. But it is now the opportunity to step back and say, can we standardize? Can we harmonize? Do we want to use this as a catalyst to, again, move forward as a business and so forth forward? So take that same mindset across those pillars of employee experience, operations, policies, technology, and now challenge the starting point, right? Let's go more towards a best practice. It doesn't mean customers need to move all the way there, but having that true advisor at the table with you to be able to say, these are the areas we think look farther out of norm than they should be. If there's a good business rationale, perfect. Let's move that forward. If they're just there because they've always been there, let's use this opportunity to talk through that, see how we can move that forward, and then carry on to that bigger transformation. And that's really been a key piece, is having a strong point of view, not just technology based, but holistic operational based, to be able to set yourself up for success ongoing. And then the third one that I would say might sound obvious, but often is overlooked, is really starting with benchmarks for what you are going to track your metrics to be for success, right? We talked about this a little bit before. Is it simply a business case? We're looking for X savings. Is there an increase in engagement? Do we want adoption on certain self-service processes? But what sadly was failed to be done is kind of that level setting initially to be able to say, where are we starting from? So we can track what we've moved to, not just day one, but beyond. So that same advisory concept where ourselves or whomever can come in and be able to do a good assessment to understand the exact landscape where all those measures are starting from currently, so that we can track progress over the implementation to be able to say, if we're making progress in the right direction, let's continue to encourage that behavior, encourage those steps. If we're not seeing it, let's course correct early on so that we don't have to go back and do rework a year or two down the road unnecessarily, but help define the process throughout the transformation instead of waiting until the end and realizing maybe we didn't quite achieve what we thought we would. So I said a lot again, but I think there's a lot to be said about it.
There's a lot in there. So I'm just going to kind of try to encapsulate some of the things that you said. So yeah. So, and I have a couple of thoughts and just some anecdotes or a little bit to add from my own experience, which I think will help to underscore the points you're making. So one is bringing that outside perspective, because you're talking about folks that have been sort of shepherding people through these types of transformations over and over and over again. They've seen that,
Precisely.
seen it and done that, right? They don't know everything, but they know, like, there's a huge, sort of kaleidoscope of things that could happen that they have some knowledge of and some understanding of, that you, as I say, the royal you of the implementing company, right,
Mhm.
might not know about. right? And so it just makes sense to have that outside perspective, and it makes things so much smoother, and it really helps to ensure things in the end. The thing about benchmarking that you brought up that's really really interesting to me is um, there's it's also important, because it's so easy if something goes wrong later post implementation, after you're a year into deployment or several months into
Yes.
into deployment, right? It is so easy to blame the technology for the problem.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. And maybe it is the technology's fault, but maybe that was because you didn't have folks helping you in the more holistic way as they could during the implementation, because maybe the technology was implemented not in the most ideal way or in the most optimal way, right? And so
Yes.
and so it helps to have those people on board to kind of give you that perspective, that that reality check, right, as you go along the way. So yeah, I used to actually work at a large vendor where
Hmm.
we did a lot of we did a lot of pre-sales, so we helped prospects understand the ROI they would likely um, uh, achieve or enjoy by modernizing their system and XYZ HCM area. Um,
Yes.
but we also were working on putting together value realization and that sort of stuff. And a couple of the folks on the team, who frankly I learned a lot from, um, one of them mentioned an instrument they used to call process maturity assessment, where they used to
Hmm.
be, right? And it was just this very involved sort of a way for the vendor to help the customer understand how their progress was moving along, understand their progress along the way, quarterly, or I think quarterly was what they sort of was the
Yeah.
standard cadence there. And so it really was, honestly, it's a way to help those organizations um, understand where they are, understand in any given moment why, hey, it's not just the technology's fault, or don't sort of freeze
Hmm.
and blame the technology. Let's look at your workflow. Let's understand how you're getting better. Is it process maturity, right? And so eh, and honestly, let's I mean, let's candidly, it's a good tool for the vendor too. The vendor
Oh,
actually
certainly.
helps, because this is just a variable that's going to happen. If you're a vendor and you just kind of like giving them the technology, say, okay, go play, this is the best technology in the world, go out there and play, right?
Right.
See you when it gets dark out for dinner, right? All those sorts of things are going to go wrong, and honestly, it's the vendor's fault too, and that even if it's not the technology's fault, it still is the vendor's fault. So it's really important to have that interplay in place, where you have that consultative relationship, that the advisory factor in place the entire way.
I agree. I actually really like what you said there, Brent. And that can be a little intimidating at first, right? The concept of that maturity assessment, because there's a chance that early on it's labeled that maybe your organization, your group, your technology, whatever it is in the lagging end of that maturity curve. And that could be a bit eye-opening to some customers early on who may think they're maybe more mature in their space or further along in their transformation than they were. But it does help baseline and level set what expectations should be today, what they should be in 1 year, 2 year, 5 years out as you go. And I'll piggyback on what you said as well. The key for that is that value realization you're talking about. That's not a one-time event, right? That's an ongoing activity that really starts at live date. There's a process to build up to it for your technology implementation, but that value realization should be something that's done routinely on an ongoing basis to understand how are we continuing to move forward with this, right? Transformation is not a get to live day and you're done. That's really the start of the journey, when now you're rolling out the additional policies into your workforce. Businesses are changing, you're acquiring new companies, AI is coming in, you have to think about how to factor that in. So your long-term vision should have the continued goals and outcomes. Your metrics may evolve as you attain them and bring them forward. But what we've done is we've kind of included within all of our service offerings ongoing value realization to help the customer and the vendor, thank you for saying that, quite frankly, make sure that we're staying on track, we're continuing delivering mutual value, but always pushing that needle forward so that we're not stagnant again and having to do another large scale transformation. But that's kind of inherent in what we're doing with delivery is continued evolution as we go. It's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the smart organizations are doing this. Um,
Mhm.
I think we have time for the bonus question that we had before.
Let's
Let
do
me
it.
see if I
Okay.
can. Let me see if I can find it here. Oh, okay. It's. I mean, this is all interrelated, but by no
Yeah.
means is this directly related to advisory. But how can, and very short and sweet, how can we control the cost of delivery of global payroll?
Can that be short and sweet? I will do my best.
The question is, not the answer, probably.
So yes, it's the multi-million dollar question, right? I think there are many facets to go at, but just at a very high level, I do think there are a couple key factors to focus in on. The first one that comes to mind for me when I hear controlling that cost is standardization and automation. Meaning, in many cases, global organizations grow inorganically and organically. There's acquisitions, there's specific businesses that come online, and rightly so because of that. There becomes fragmentation in how policies are administered, the platforms that they're run on, even the teams and groups that are responsible for those. So, thing one is it's hard to control your costs when you don't know what your costs are. And being able to bring that into a standardized environment on perhaps a single platform, on perhaps a single or a limited number of vendors or support models behind it, and then even the pay practices and policies that are there, right? Part of that advisory work we would typically do for a new customer in that situation would be, let's understand where the costs are today. Let's look at the existing model. How can that line up with the future state? And then that's where we can start to drive some of that business case value to say, without really changing what you pay your employees or the headcount there, just by streamlining and standardizing your environment, there's significant opportunity to be able to control some of that cost and have more visibility into where and how those are being determined. Then from there, you can take on that next layer of what we would call data driven decision making, where once you have access to that data, once you know your fixed cost footprint, now you think about your wages and how you're actually paying your employees, the volume of employees. You can start looking at overtime, things along those way. But for most customers who aren't already in that kind of streamlined, centralized model, that's where I go initially is to say standardization around that, which can lead to some automation, lead to some simplification in your environment. But trying to bring it to that centralized team, centralized system is a material add in moving towards controlling the cost.
Yeah, yeah. So one thing you mentioned, I'm going to kind of paraphrase it and just kind of
Please.
recast it a little bit as global expansion, right? It can be messy. It's almost never, very well defined or it's never a clean, like super duper clean process. I
Agreed.
would say, right? And a lot of organizations, they become global through acquisitions, right?
Yep.
Acquisitive actions, right? And so, but it's good to have sort of oh, I can't think of the word right now. I was going to say rubric, but that's not the right word. But like a system in place. So you understand. So as you acquire organizations and grow as a company,
Mhm.
right? Every organization you have will have a different payroll system, right?
Oh, most
And there's
certainly.
yeah, and you can't just sort of you know, get rid of it right away. You definitely cannot do that, right? But eventually okay, so your guiding North Star might be, okay, every organization that we acquire will keep their existing payroll system in place for however long, right? Or maybe for the foreseeable future. We don't know when we're going to change it. Maybe we'll at some point, but we don't know. Or you go into it saying, hey, we have our sort of our master payroll or our
Mhm.
headquarters, our HQ payroll system. And depending on how capable it is, we eventually are going to transition our acquired companies onto our payroll system, but there's going to be but you have to, the whole point is to have a plan in
Have a
place.
plan.
Understand, like, what is your guiding ethos? So, like, what is your plan? And this
Yeah.
is about payroll as a strategic function in the organization, because if you have an organizational leadership that's going about acquiring companies, maybe you have a PE firm that's kind of driving this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
payroll can end up in the back seat or just being reactive all the time, and somebody in the payroll department to say, hey, wait a minute, man, we should be thinking about this. This could be a lot
Yes.
more operationally efficient if you would just involve us in the process. And that might be maybe a little bit confrontational, but at the same time, a way for payroll to become suddenly more strategic, as seen
So
as a
true.
strategic partner in the organization.
Yeah, so true. I agree with everything you just said, Brandon. I think you're correct, right? Up front, define that playbook, essentially. As we think about acquisitions, even opening up new locations, new businesses, what is the approach? If it's going to be via PE, if we're going to allow some duration of retaining existing systems and policies, but you can scale that. If it's going to be a 50-person acquisition versus a 5,000-person acquisition, that might have a different intent. But the reality is, you're correct. In many cases, these decisions are being made at a different level, and then sometimes find their way down to the HR and payroll teams to implement very quickly because we need to meet certain timelines for certain other initiatives that are going on, which is fine. I understand, right? That's the nature of the business we live in. But being able to have that plan designed so you can come to the table and say, here's exactly how we're going to execute for this to hit the date we need. And then here's our plan to move them into our enterprise playbook, our enterprise mindset, systems, et cetera, within 6, 9, 12 months, whatever the case is, because the goal is to meet the business case, right? That's why we're acquiring the company. That's why we're opening up this new location. So enable payroll to be that strategic provider partner at the initial onset. And then once we prove that out, right, go forward, we can help streamline those timelines and really be helping to drive the strategy, not just receiving the actions that need to be done as a part of the operations. I think it's very well said.
Yeah, exactly. And thanks for putting a fine point on that. You're absolutely correct. A lot of moving parts to keep in mind here. Jake, thank you so much for joining us again on the
Oh, always.
podcast.
Thank you.
Another very engaging conversation, really interesting stuff. You're doing great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.